Hello, my friend. Thank you for being here with me tonight. Before we begin, take a slow breath. Let the air move gently in and let it fall softly out. You're safe, you're here, and together, we are about to drift into a story woven from light, silence, and the ancient breath of time. As you settle into your place, let the world outside loosen its hold. Let the noise fade. Let your thoughts settle like dust in a quiet room. Now, listen. Somewhere far away, beyond the veil of the present moment, the sun is sinking behind the mountains of ancient Greece. Not abruptly, not with fire, but with a soft surrender, as though even daylight must kneel before the coming of rest. The horizon glows with a thin gold thread, a final whisper of warmth stretching across the sky, so delicate it could snap at the slightest breath of wind. This, right now, is the hour Apollo loved most, the in-between hour, the moment when the world is neither bright nor dark, neither awake nor asleep, but hovering, weightless, in silence. Aegean winds drift along the coast, carrying the scent of salt, olive branches, and ancient stories half buried in the waves. If you listen closely, you might hear them, soft as the hush of fabric brushing marble. High above the shoreline, a temple stands pillars of white stone, washed in amber light, quiet as a sleeping deity. The marble glows faintly, as if holding on to the last warmth of the sun, as if it refuses to let Apollo's presence fade too quickly. Between the columns, incense burns. The smoke rises in pale, wandering ribbons, curling into the twilight air, moving like thoughts drifting through the mind before sleep. Priests and priestesses have already withdrawn for the evening. Their footsteps no longer echo through the courtyard. Only the breath of the wind remains, whispering through stone, singing in a language older than myth. Tonight, this temple is yours, empty, sacred, waiting. You walk slowly toward it, each step growing quieter, each thought becoming softer. The world behind you dissolves into a gentle blur, every worry, every weight, falling away like petals on still water. Ahead, the final traces of sunset rest upon the altar, a thin glowing line that seems to pulse with its own memory of the god of light. For even when Apollo departs across the sky, his presence lingers, not in the blinding brilliance of noon, but in this gentle hour, the hour of retreat, the hour when radiance becomes kindness, when light becomes something you can hold without fear. Perhaps this is why the ancients believed Apollo had two faces, one bright and powerful, and one quiet, reflective, almost tender, and tonight, it is the quiet one we will follow. So take another breath, slowly in and softly out. Feel the warmth of the fading light brushing against your skin, like a hand guiding you gently toward rest. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw relax. Let your mind sway like a boat rocking on calm evening waters. Apollo's story begins not with fire and brilliance, but with moments like this, moments where the world seems to hold still, as if listening, as if waiting for something sacred to be spoken. And so we begin, not with thunder or triumph, but with a whisper carried on the breeze, a whisper of the god of light, the god of the golden lyre, the god whose voice could calm storms and whose music could guide even the most restless soul into sleep. Even now, as the sky darkens to deep blue, you may imagine him not as a blazing charioteer racing across the heavens, but as a figure walking alone along the cliffs of Delos, his steps unhurried, his presence soft, his radiance lowered like a lantern covered with silk. The light he carries tonight is gentle. It does not dazzle. It soothes. It quiets. It surrounds you like a warm blanket laid across your shoulders. Maybe you can feel it now, a faint, warm glow somewhere in your chest, spreading slowly, comfortingly, like a sunrise happening inside the heart. Apollo's light has always been like that. Not just illumination, but clarity. Not just brightness, but peace. Tonight, as you drift deeper into this story, allow that gold, soft radiance to guide you. Let it melt the edges of your thoughts. Let it wash gently over the places within you that feel unsettled. Let it lead you, step by step, toward the quiet center of the night. Because in this story, you are not just listening. You are traveling through myth, through memory, through time itself. And Apollo walks beside you, silent and calm, his presence like the last warmth of sunset resting on your skin. His voice, when it reaches you, is not loud. It is soft, measured, almost musical, like the distant pluck of a lyre carried on the wind. He speaks not to command, but to comfort, not to instruct, but to ease the heart into rest. And as the twilight deepens into night and the sky fills with slow-moving stars, you feel yourself floating not away from the world, but deeper into it, deeper into its rhythms, deeper into its ancient heartbeat. You are drifting with Apollo now, drifting through the soft light he leaves behind, drifting through a story as old as the first dawn. And when you're ready, when your breath is slow and your body feels weightless, we will step into the beginning of his tale. A tale born from a wandering island, a desperate mother, a jealous goddess, and a newborn light so pure that the world itself paused to witness it. But not yet, not quite. For now, just rest here, at the threshold of night, with the last glow of the sun god brushing against your skin. Let the light fade softly, let your thoughts drift gently, and when you're ready, we will begin the story of Apollo. In the quiet, in the calm, in the soft, golden hush of evening. The evening air still carries the last thin gold of sunset when the tale of his birth begins. And it begins not with triumph but with flight. Leto moves like someone who has learned to make herself small to survive. She is a mother wrapped in fear and in dignity, her footsteps pressed into paths that are almost invisible, paths made of urgency and prayer. Hera, with her stern, jealous gaze, has set a shadow on her heels, and the world grows narrower with each passing hour. Leto walks at dusk and at dawn, in the gaps between storms and the quiet of olive groves, always searching for a place that will accept the weight of what she carries. There is tenderness in the way she holds her belly, as if protecting something both fragile and inevitable. There is a weary faith in her eyes, because she knows that whatever land shelter her must be more than stone or sand. It must be a haven carved from mercy. The motif of the mother seeking a safe birth appears everywhere in human stories because it mirrors something inside us, a primal ache for refuge, and a reverence for the beginning that is both vulnerable and heroic. Letos' journey is that ache made human, a trembling song of hope against the drumbeat of divine displeasure. The islands of the Aegean pass by her like silent witnesses, each a small world of reeds and rocks and fishermen. Each offers perhaps only a refusal, only the indifferent edge of its shore. Many places close their doors, stones refuse to warm for her. Winds carry gossip and fear, and return them to her like stinging salt. And then there is Delos, not yet a sacred isle, but a wandering fragment, a place that drifts with the sea like a breath, caught on the lip of the world. It is the smallest of islands, thin and pale as a memory, a slab of earth that seems too fragile to hold a single secret, let alone the birth of gods. Delos floats with the indifferent grace of driftwood, carried along by currents that do not ask questions. It has no fixed name among the maps of men. It is a thing that moves in and out of charts, a place that could vanish with a single storm if the sea chose to be cruel. But for Leto, it becomes a soft, improbable anchor. There is a hush when she steps upon it, not the drum of triumph, but the small, gentle silence of acceptance. The myth says the island was unwilling at first, that it needed to be given a reason to anchor, that the hands of gods had to still the waters and fix Delos to the earth so Leto might find a place to give birth. Think of that image for a moment. An island, like a sigh, stopped by a god's intentional breath, set firm as if the world itself had chosen to pause and make room for new light. The anchoring of Delos is not merely a geological curiosity in the poem of the world. It is a symbol so soft and sure that it changes the way the story will be read for centuries. To fix a drifting island is to fix a point of reference. To make solid something that had been at the mercy of waves is to declare that order, however fragile, may be shaped even from transience. Delos, once anchored, becomes a place where travelers will gather, where ritual will knit the fragile into the enduring, where the chance occurrence of birth becomes the origin of a center. So Leto rests there, under a sky that seems too wide for the small isle, and the island receives her with a tenderness that feels like forgiveness. It is here, by those pale shores, that the world leans close to listen when new light comes into being. The birth is not a burst of sunlight and fanfare. It is quiet in the way that beginning often is a low, steady miracle rather than an announcement. Leto labors in the privacy of the stony dunes, with only a handful of companions and the distant, unobtrusive murmur of the sea for witness. From that labor comes not a single child but twins. Artemis, who will wear the green shade of groves and hunt in moonlit silence, and Apollo, who will carry something of the day in him, a tempered brightness that speaks of measure and music and prophecy. There is poetry in this pairing. There is balance. Artemis is the cool, immediate night, the forest's hush, the silver arrow's flight, the protective fist of the wild. Apollo is the calculated dawn, the measured line of the lyre, the clear syllable of an oracle, the geometry of the sky. They are not simply siblings. They are two complementary answers to the world's need, one for preservation in the dark, and one for illumination in the light. And though they share a mother, their spirits move in opposite directions, tracing the human heart's two inseparable capacities to seek shelter within and to reach outward in understanding. You can imagine Artemis lifting her face to the moon, while Apollo smooths his hand over a newly tuned string. One holds a bow that breathes quietly in the underbrush. The other holds a lyre whose tones are bright and disciplined. This contrast is not conflict, it is choreography. It is how the ancient Greeks learned to think about balance, about the necessity of opposing forces that together make meaning. Delos, now fixed and sacred by the presence of these births, becomes more than a physical place. It becomes a map in the mind. The anchoring we spoke of earlier, that pause made by the gods to allow a small island to hold a mother in need, turns into a larger gesture, a metaphor for civilization. What is civilization if not a decision to take what drifts and to bind it into patterns, to set down stones in order, to teach language to be precise, to build temples where memory can live, to teach music to follow measure rather than chaos. Delos' transformation from drift to center echoes the Greeks' own emergence from a scattered mosaic of tribes and tales into a culture with temples, shared stories, and an ethic of beauty and reason. To say that the island was fixed for the birth of Apollo is to say that the world made space for logic, for song, for prophecy, for the disciplines that would become the foundation of Greek thought. Apollo's birth on an island so delicately chosen is a mythic shorthand. The arrival of ordered thought and luminous creativity in a world that might otherwise have remained unmoored. The island's new permanence is a gentle promise that human life, art, and law may be gathered and held, even against the tides. When Apollo first opens his eyes, imagine the simplicity of the light that accompanies him. It is not the harsh noon that blinds and commands. It is not the raw glare of dominance. It is a clean, soft gold, like the inner light of a lamp whose flame has learned restraint. This light is a lesson in moderation. It suggests clarity without cruelty, knowledge without arrogance, and a beauty that is precise rather than ostentatious. Think of sunlight filtered through the leaves of an olive tree at dawn, precise shafts that fall like fingers onto cool stone. That is the kind of radiance that settles on this newborn god. It is light that makes edges clear without stripping away comfort. It is the careful light of a mind coming into order. Perhaps this is why those who would later call upon Apollo sought not only his power, but his measure. They sought clarity to understand, structure to compose, and tone to heal. Apollo's light is the kind of illumination that teaches the eye to see, the ear to listen, and the heart to rest in understanding. It is a light that allows sleep to come without confusion, because it reveals what is necessary and softens what is not. There is also an almost fragile humanity to this moment in myth. Even as gods gather attention across ages, at the moment of his birthing, Apollo is small, vulnerable, unsuspecting of the vast roles preordained for him. He is newborn in a world still raw with natural elements, salt and wind and the scent of wild thyme, and in that smallness there is an intimacy we can enter. We watch a god who will grow into a principle of civilization, and yet we begin with him as any child might be begun, with needs, with breaths, with someone to hold him close. Leto becomes not only the mother of a luminous deity, but a figure representing maternal suffering and perseverance. Her story is threaded with quiet heroism, because she navigates divine wrath with endurance, and it is her journey to which the island answers with steadfastness. In that steadfastness, we find the first lesson of Apollo's presence, that order and culture do not arrive from domination alone, but often through the careful tending of the vulnerable. Delos says yes in the softest voice. It anchors not by force, but by a willingness to receive. And that willing acceptance becomes the seed of what Apollo will represent. When the island's people, later pilgrims and poets, and those who sought oracles finally learn of this birth, they do not come rushing in with triumphal songs. They come, in the best versions of the story, with humility and with offerings, with slow, ritual steps that honor the fragility and power of beginnings. They build altars and learn to listen for that clean, soft gold in the world, in the balanced line of a poem, in the calm calculation of a physician, in the tuned string that soothes the heart. Delos becomes a place where light is refined into wisdom, where the simple act of fixing a floating thing becomes an example of how humans might fix meaning in their own lives. The temple's stones will absorb hymn and footfall, will remember the hush of lullabies. Even the wind that once carried Letos' fear learns to move with reverence when it passes through columns and courtyards. From a drifting speck, a center grows not by force, but by story, by care, by repeated acts of attention. And in that way, the myth keeps teaching. Apollo's birth tells us that something as gentle as a mother's plea, and as improbably small as a drifting isle, may change the shape of the world. The story asks us to notice how fragile beginnings can become the most steadfast things when they are treated with respect and ritual. It asks us to remember that civilization itself is a collection of such moments, thin, fragile decisions to hold, to name, to sing. So we keep this scene in our hands like a small lamp. Letos' tired fingers, Delos' trembling shore, the twin newborns wrapped in the island's first breath, and that clean, soft gold falling across their faces. Let it be a light that you carry inward as you rest, an image of sure gentleness to lay with you as sleep comes nearer. As you breathe, imagine the island settled beneath you, steady now, anchored a tender center in a restless sea, and know that the kind of order Apollo will come to represent grows, first, from the acceptance of a place to be held, The soft gold of Apollo's birth had barely settled across Delos when his childhood began to unfold like the first rays of dawn. There was no long stretch of infancy for him, no hesitant growth, no stumbling progress through early years. He grew as morning light grows quietly, steadily, with a certainty that feels older than time. One moment he was a newborn wrapped in Latos' trembling arms, and the next he was already standing on the island's pale stones, watching the sea with a calm that did not belong to a child. The ancients said that light does not learn to shine, it simply shines. And so it was with Apollo. His body lengthened like a beam stretching across the horizon, and his eyes sharpened with the clarity of a fresh sunrise. There was no awkwardness in him, no confusion, only the elegance of something fulfilling its nature. Delos felt the change first. The island seemed to breathe differently when he walked, as though the earth knew it was holding a being made from precision and radiance. The sea also knew. Its waves softened when they reached the shore, as if to greet him without disturbing the stillness he carried. Even the wind, once restless in its wandering, slowed around him, moving with a kind of reverence. Apollo's presence reorganized the air, as though the world were learning its own shape by watching him. There is a moment in myth where Apollo, still young, turns to the world and speaks his first declarations. Not declarations of conquest, not promises of storm or vengeance, but simple, clear truths about what he is meant to hold. His voice, still warm with newborn gold, carried across the rocks and the sea when he said, "I will take the bow, I will take the lyre, and I will take the gift of prophecy." 3 statements, each as measured as a ray of sunlight falling exactly where it intends to fall. 3 choices that weave together the core of his nature: precision, harmony, and vision. He chose the bow first, not for violence but for direction. A bow is a line made disciplined, a path given purpose. To draw a bowstring is to understand tension, balance, the delicate meeting point between force and release. Apollo's arrows were never about chaos, they were about clarity. They moved the way thoughts move when sharpened by truth, straight and sure, finding exactly the place they were meant to land. The Greeks saw in his bow not only the power to wound, but the power to define. An arrow teaches the world where the line is. It marks boundaries, carves pathways, names what is hidden. In Apollo's hands, it became the instrument of exactness, a way for light to touch distant places without losing its form. Then he chose the lyre, a delicate thing, curved like the back of a crescent moon and threaded with strings that shimmered when struck. The lyre is the sound of order revealing itself. When Apollo's fingers first brushed across its strings, the world seemed to pause, not out of fear, but out of recognition. The notes did not scatter, they aligned. They formed patterns that felt inevitable and kind, like stars arranging themselves into constellations. The sound of his lyre was soft at first, a small golden ripple across the air, as if sunrise were being translated into music. It glowed with warmth, with gentleness, with a purity that made even the sea quiet its breathing. Each note was a step, a measure, a thought shaped into resonance. The Greeks believed music was not entertainment, it was structure, a way to teach the heart how to hold itself. Under Apollo's touch, the lyre became the instrument of calm reason, of healing, of measured beauty. It was light turned into sound, and then there was prophecy. The ability to see beyond what is visible, to listen to what the world whispers beneath its surface. Prophecy is not spectacle, it is depth. It is the calm beneath the waves, the pattern that hides inside chaos, the truth waiting in the quiet. When Apollo claimed it, he was not claiming the future, he was claiming understanding. To know what is coming is to see the shape of things, the architecture of time. It is the highest form of light. not the light that illuminates surfaces, but the light that reveals meaning. The Greeks linked prophecy with Apollo because they believed knowledge flows the same way sunlight flows, revealing, defining, clarifying. Where there is light, there is the unveiling of truth. Where there is Apollo, there is the steady unveiling of the world's hidden structure. These three gifts, the bow, the lyre, the oracle, are not separate things. They are the facets of a single idea. To the ancient world, Apollo was the embodiment of structured light, a reminder that illumination is not simply brightness, it is precision, harmony, and insight woven together. For them, light meant knowledge. Knowledge meant music, because music expresses what mere words cannot. Music meant reason, because harmony is the mathematics of the soul. Reason meant healing, because clarity brings peace. And peace, when it settles into a human life, is its own medicine. So the Greeks looked to Apollo not only for prophecy, not only for song, not only for the steady flight of arrows, but for the calm logic that ties all these things together. Apollo was not just a god of light, he was a god of the mind, resting cleanly within itself. Imagine, then, his youth on Delos. Golden mornings where the air gleamed faintly around him. Quiet afternoons where he practiced drawing the bowstring, each movement a lesson in breath and balance. Evenings where he tuned the lyre, adjusting its strings with a precision that felt like prayer. Nights when he sat beside the sea, listening to the murmur beneath the waves, the first hints of the prophecies that would later echo through Delphi. There was no wildness in him, no unrestrained impulse. Even in youth he carried a stillness, a sense of measured existence. He was not merely growing, he was forming. Every time his hand met the lyre, the sound that rose from it was soft and golden. Light translated into tone, warmth turned into resonance. It was the sound of the world exhaling, the sound of disorder falling gently into place, the sound of a mind becoming itself. Some said the first notes he ever played drifted across the island and settled on the waves, teaching the sea how to calm itself. Others said the olive leaves turned toward him, not for sunlight, but for the clarity in his music. What is certain is that the world listened, not because he demanded attention, but because his presence aligned things, thoughts, winds, tides, hearts into quiet coherence. Apollo did not have a childhood in the human sense. He had a dawn, a slow, unfolding dawn in which every trait, every purpose, every gleaming thread of his being found its rightful place. And as he grew, the soft gold of his birth deepened into something stronger, clearer, more defined. His light began to choose its direction. His music began to find its depth. His sight began to stretch farther than the horizon. The world that once drifted now began to find shape. For wherever Apollo walked, order followed. Not rigidly, not harshly, but gently, the way morning reorganizes shadows, turning confusion into form. And so, in the soft glow of his youth, Apollo became not just a child of light, he became the blueprint of light, its precision, its peace, its lingering warmth. A dawn in human shape, a song in golden form, a prophecy waiting to open. When we speak of Apollo's light in these stories, we must begin with a careful distinction, because the Greeks themselves kept it tidy in their minds. The blazing chariot that drags the sun across the sky belongs to Helios, the cosmic driver of day's course. Apollo's light is of another order, an interior radiance, the light of mind and measure. It is a metaphysical kind of brightness, one that illuminates pattern and meaning rather than simply warming stone. If Helios is the broad hand that sweeps the day, Apollo is the attentive fingertip that traces a letter in the dark and makes its shape legible. From his earliest steps across Delos, this intelligence light was evident. It touched objects and did not merely reveal them, it set them in relation. Around Apollo, things acquired proportions and names. Around him, chaos folded into figure and meaning. Imagine him walking through a stand of pines on the island's windward ridge, the needles arranging themselves to catch what radiance he carried like little mirrors of thought. The air there has a winter warmth to it, a dry, bright hush that is not the heat of summer but the clear, disciplined warmth of sun that has learned restraint. As he passes, a streak of warmth follows not a flare, but a deliberate seam of gold that falls along the bark and sifts through the branches like an idea moving through a mind. It is the kind of light that makes texture legible, the ridges in wood, the parallel of leaf veins, the counted cadence of a bird's wingbeat. In this image, Apollo moving, pine forest softening into pattern, we grasp the essence of his authority. He does not merely brighten, he orders. This ordering appears in the first small acts we are told about him. Myths preserve certain early episodes not because they are grand, but because they are exemplary, because they show the principle at work. Two modest stories stand out from his first years and help explain how the ancients came to link Apollo with rational light. In one, he comes upon a village worried about the season. The people are anxious because the rains have been unreliable, and the elders speak of omens and offers but have no steady answer. Farmers stand at thresholds, hands pressed to the grain, eyes restless like a sea changed by wind. They ask the young god for the shape of what is to come. Apollo listens, not with the violence of a lightning strike, but with the attention of a physician feeling pulses. He studies the clouds, the soil's odor, the flight of returning swallows, and then he speaks measured words that are more like arithmetic than prophecy. He tells them the pattern of the coming months, when the rains will favor barley, when the veering winds will harm the vineyards, and where to set the granaries to keep the harvest safe. It is not sensational revelation. It is practical, applied foresight. The villagers go about their work with a certain steadiness, and when harvest comes, the yield is steadier than before. They say afterward that the light of his knowledge guided the season, that his insight prevented loss, and that the village in turn learned a small discipline about watching and timing. That story is easy to imagine in the dim alcoves of a rustic shrine, where people come to hear a calm voice that reduces fear by making the future legible. Apollo's prophecy here functions as technique rather than miracle. It is a craft that refines chance into predictability. The narrative insists that wisdom is not mystical noise, but a clear perception of the world's recurring forms, seasons, weather, the behavior of animals, and the capacity to translate those patterns into careful action. Apollo's light, in this sense, is the illumination that makes planning possible. It is the mental brightness that enables agriculture, settlement, and continuity. Another early account tells of a solitary traveler moving along a dangerous coastal path at dusk. This traveler is not a hero in armor, but a person with a small lamp and a heavy sack, worn and alert to the sound of cliffs and the shifting of pebbles. History offers many such figures, lonely walkers of uncertain roads, bearing goods and anxieties in equal measure. One evening, weather turns sour sooner than expected, and fog pockets the path. The traveler stumbles where the road narrows, the cliffs threatening to dissolve into sea. Out of a hush, Apollo's presence arrives not as a voice from the heavens, but as a sequence of small signs. A sudden rearrangement of gulls, a flash of heron flight, the way a stray reed points inland. He does not push the traveler violently towards safety. He makes the route legible. By changing minor elements of perception, the tilt of a feather, the shimmer in a puddle, the god clarifies what the traveler had misread. The path becomes visible again, step by careful step, and the traveler reaches a haven where he sleeps, while thunder rolls beyond earshot. He wakes with a sense of calm he cannot explain, and later tells of having followed clues that felt less like instruction than like the world itself aligning to the truth. There is a pattern here. Apollo's interventions are not about overwhelming force, but about refinement. His power is to reveal the small, correctable alignments within a larger mess. This is a kind of healing of perspective. It restores sight where sight had failed, and in doing so it prevents harm and encourages flourishing. Across these modest tales, we perceive the reason the Greeks associated light with mind, and mind with good order. For them, light was not only a physical condition, it was the metaphor for cognitive clarity, the ability to see how things fit together. The conceptual link between light and intelligence is ancient and almost instinctive. When you understand something for the first time, you sometimes say you see it. Light, in metaphor, is the moment of recognition, the easing of confusion into comprehension. Apollo, therefore, is the god of those moments, the god who does more than illuminate objects. He clarifies relations. This is why the objects of his patronage cluster around human faculties that require discernment. Music that organizes feeling into pattern, medicine that orders the body's chaos into health, and prophecy that seeks to find consistent arcs where disorder seemed to rule. He holds a unified portfolio, where sunlight allows eyes to discern edges. Apollo's light allows the mind to discern meaning. There is another, subtler reason the Greeks made Apollo the emblem of intellectual light, and it has to do with aesthetics. They recognized that beauty rests on proportion, harmony in music, balance in architecture, symmetry in sculpture, all require measurement and restraint. Apollo's temperament is thus instructive. He models a beauty that is measured, not extravagant, a music that seduces through order rather than through unpredictability. This aesthetic preference shaped a civilization's values. To praise Apollo is to praise the ideal that form ought to reveal function, that art must belong to reason as much as to feeling. In perceiving him as the patron of music and prophecy and medicine, the Greeks were choosing a worldview in which the good life proceeds from understanding and graceful form. We think of his lyre again in this light, but now with renewed emphasis on its function as pedagogy. When Apollo plucks the strings, he is not only making pleasant sound, he is teaching the world how to attune. Music, under his hand, becomes a method for aligning the inner life with the outer world. It calms the pulse, slows the breath, and organizes attention. It makes disorder tolerable by wrapping it in rhythm. The lyre's tone is precise, each string a delineation of pitch and proportion, and when those tones combine, they create a lattice through which the mind can move without panic. This is the remedial power of ordered sound, a way to train the feelings to be economical, to refrain from noise, to find repose in measure. Medicine, too, falls under the ambit of his illuminating touch. The Greeks had healers and temples, where sleep and incubation were part of the curative process. Apollo's role as a bringer of health is not, again, a magic cure but a method. Healing involves diagnosis, attention, and a steady regimen, a disciplined application of knowledge to a problem. Light, in the metaphoric economy of these myths, reveals the lesion. Thought diagnoses it. Measured action treats it. When Apollo aids in healing, he models the cognitive clarity that must precede effective care. To him, ailments are patterns to be recognized and managed, not inscrutable punishments. This is a humane conception of the divine. The god operates as an exemplar of fine sense and precise touch. If Apollo's power is intellectual light, it also has an ethical dimension. The Greeks often linked temperance and the measured life to moral worth, and Apollo's temperament models that moderation. Where excess leads to ruin, measured clarity leads to stable flourishing. His brightness is therefore ethical as well as epistemic. To be illumined by Apollo is to be guided toward proportion in one's actions, to avoid noise and arrogance, to prefer structure to vanity. In a culture that valued civic order, poetic balance, and medical practice, such virtues became pillars of public life. Thus, Apollo's light is not merely personal, It is civic. It shapes how communities orient themselves to truth, art, law, and medicine. The imagery of Apollo moving through the world, leaving seams of warm gold in his wake, is also instructive for how the ancients imagined knowledge spreading. Knowledge was not a conflagration that consumed everything in its path. It was a constructive, patient kind of warming that permitted growth. Fields cultivated by reason yield more reliably than those left to whim. Songs structured according to measure produce communal harmony more readily than wild improvisations. Thus, the god's passage through a landscape is not a terrifying razing. It is a civilizing passage, gentle enough to be survivable, transformative enough to be enduring. We could linger, too, on the specific metaphors embedded in the stories of harvest and of safe travel, because they reveal a practical orientation toward the future. Agriculture is the great demonstrator of applied knowledge. Sowing and reaping require prediction, attention to rhythm, and an art of timing. By associating Apollo with a confident understanding of seasonal patterns, the myths enshrine the idea that intellectual light helps communities convert uncertainty into habit. And travel, the other recurring motif, is a measure of adaptability in a world of shifting conditions. Guiding a traveler by clarifying a path is emblematic of how reason functions. It does not make the world less dangerous by ignoring peril. It makes the world navigable by giving the voyager better instruments of perception. In a quieter register, these stories also teach us solace, that what is frightening about unpredictability can be eased by cultivated attention. If you must walk a path in fog, a practiced eye and subtle signs will deliver you to shelter. If you must plant in a season of variance, disciplined observation and modest adjustments will protect your work. Apollo, in his modest ministrations, offers a template for how the divine can be an ally of prudence and not only of inspiration. From the cultural perspective, the ancients used Apollo as a container for the values they wished to elevate. They did not necessarily believe in him as a literal beam of thought in each mind. Rather, they framed him as the archetype of a set of practices and sensibilities. The practice of tuning one's senses, the sensibility of restraint, the discipline of technique. He becomes, in other words, a model for intellectual training in a pre-scientific age. His presence recommends calm observation, measured inference, and the use of pattern to reduce chance. And when you listen to these accounts in the hush of night, as the story winds its gold seam across pine and stone, there is another, quieter lesson to absorb. Light that clarifies is not always comfortable. Clarity sometimes shows error as much as possibility. To know the precise way something fails is to face the need for repair. Apollos illumination may require effort, because it invites change from slackness to attention, from habit to correction. Yet that invitation is ultimately a form of care. It is the god's way of urging creatures toward durable life. So the early powers of Apollo are not spectacles, but methods. They are ways of making the world legible and thus manageable. Prophecy as applied knowledge for harvest, guidance as small reconstructions of perception for travelers, music as training for the passions, medicine as the application of observation and regimen to the body. All of these derive from a single formative principle: light as reason. Through these gifts, the Greeks articulated a theological aesthetics that made intelligence sacred and sanctified the practices by which it could be cultivated. As dusk deepens and the island's pine shadows lengthen, picture Apollo alone for a moment, sitting with his lyre at his knees. He plucks a note, and it hangs in the air as a clean bead of sound. It is not loud, it is precise. It draws the listener's attention inward, like a bell that calls a restless mind to a single point. That is the particular power of his light. It concentrates attention where scattered thought once lay, and in that concentration, healing and order become possible. This, the ancients believed, is what the god offers most generously. Not blinding dazzle, but the calm, disciplined illumination that lets people see the lines that matter. When you let this image settle, Apollo's light passing through pine and stone, his small interventions in harvest and travel, his lyre's modest, organizing tones, you can understand why his presence was so central to Greek imagination. He was not merely a symbol of brightness, he was an emblem of the mind's capacity to bring form to life. Through him, light and reason, song and healing, become a single economy of human flourishing. And as you rest with this thought, feel that same calmness spiraling down into you, the clarity that comes when a problem is drawn into focus, the relief of a path becoming visible, the soothing cadence of a well-tuned string. These are Apollo's gifts, not thunder, but a steady, human light that makes living a little more legible, a little more manageable, a little less lonely. Hold that image with a soft hand as the island night deepens, and let it guide you gently toward the next part of his tale. The light that Apollo carried in his youth did not stay confined to Delos. It was not the kind of light that sat politely on the horizon or remained obediently in a single place. It was a seeking light, the kind that moves, not because it is restless, but because illumination, by its nature, is drawn toward shadow. And so the soft, measured radiance that had grown within him began to stretch beyond pine groves and shorelines, reaching toward territories where clarity had never walked. Apollo himself seemed to understand this instinctively, that where there is order, disorder waits. Where there is meaning, the unformed lies at the edge. And where a new light has been born, it will inevitably be called toward whatever darkness preceded it. He left Delos quietly, not with fanfare or the stepping forth of a triumphant god, but with the calm certainty of someone following a path that had already been marked inside the world. The Aegean winds brushed his hair lightly as he traveled, as if testing the warmth of him, as if learning how to carry this new kind of brightness. When he walked along high coastal ridges, the earth seemed to steady itself beneath his feet, and when he passed through valleys, wild thyme and young laurel leaned almost imperceptibly toward him, as though recognizing in his presence something they had long awaited. But Apollo did not move for worship or acclaim. His steps were slow and thoughtful, almost contemplative, as if the land itself was whispering suggestions and he was listening carefully, absorbing every contour and shift with a patient mind. For a long while he traveled without destination, letting the intelligence of the world guide him. He listened to the pull in the air, a faint but undeniable summons that traveled along the spine of the earth. It was not a call of language but of resonance, a vibration that lived beneath stone and riverbed, beneath root and bone, beneath the geography of consciousness itself. It was the sound of something ancient, shifting in its sleep, a residue of an era before shape, a memory of the world before the gods had learned their names. Apollo followed that subtle call northward, through landscapes that seemed to ripple with old breath. By day, he studied the way the sun fell across ravines, the way the rivers carved meaning into the land. By night, he listened to the distant hum that rose from the mountains, a hum that layered itself with the murmuring of wind until it grew into a low, steady, unsettling drone, like the earth remembering something it wished to forget. And the farther he walked, the clearer that resonance became. It was the presence of Python. But before we follow Apollo into that encounter, we must understand who or what Python truly was. The myths sometimes simplify Python into a monster defeated by a young god. But the deeper traditions, the ones whispered in sanctuaries or spoken in the corners of old hymns, describe something different. Python was not merely a serpent. Python was a remnant, a leftover fragment of a much older world, a world unstructured, unmeasured, and heavy with primordial breath. If Apollo was the light that clarifies, Python was the dusk of meaning, the place where outlines dissolve and the mind trembles without knowing why. In those older times, before Olympus, the earth was dense with shapes that had not yet settled into form. Life and unlife moved in parallel currents. Awareness flickered in strange places. The boundary between dream and waking was porous. Python belonged to that time, a creature shaped not by logic but by the shuddering of the world as it learned how to exist. Some say Python was born from the mud left after the Great Flood. Others say Python emerged from the steam of the earliest volcanic breaths. Still others whispered that Python was not born but remained, that whatever the world cast off as it transitioned from chaos into cosmos took a shape, and that shape slithered into the caves below the mountains, curling itself around warm fissures like a memory coiling to protect itself from time. Python, then, was not evil. It was ancient. It was not cruel. It was primordial. It did not oppose the gods out of malice. It opposed them because the world had changed and left no space for things that could not bear definition. To exist alongside Apollo, the god of clarity, proportion, and foresight, would be to face dissolution. A creature made from unstructured breath cannot survive in the presence of structured light. That was the nature of their opposition. The place where Python dwelled was a hollow at the foot of Parnassus, where vapors rose from the earth, carrying riddles and visions like smoke that had learned how to speak. Even before Apollo reached it, the air carried the scent of something old, something that lived in the lungs of time. The ground was warm beneath his sandals, and the wind moved strangely here as though it were both seeking him and avoiding him at once. He paused often on the slopes leading to Python's cavern, not out of fear, but out of reverence. This was not a place to rush. This was a site of transition, the seam between the world that had been and the world that wished to be. When Apollo finally approached the mouth of the cavern, he did not see Python immediately. What he felt first was its presence, an immense, inhaling stillness. The cavern breathed, and the breath of that breath was heavy with the scent of mineral depth and ancient steam. It was as if the earth itself were exhaling the fatigue of millennia. The sound was deep, slow, cyclical. It was not threatening, it was simply old, and Apollo stood at the threshold with neither sword nor shield. He carried only his bow, his mind, and the calm intelligence that had been growing within him since birth. The light that emanated from him did not flare. It simply existed, a warm, deliberate glow that spread across the stone, making the rough surfaces legible, giving shape to the darkness without wounding it. Python stirred. The movement was not aggressive. It was the shifting of something that had been asleep for a long time. The sound was like stone grinding against breath, a deep, resonant drag that filled the cavern with echoes. In that moment, Apollo did not step back. He stepped inward, into the dimness, into the warm exhale of a world that preceded him. Python's eyes opened slowly, two dark pools of memory, reflecting not malice but age. There was curiosity in that gaze, and a quiet awareness, the recognition that this young, measured light had come to do what time had long prepared. The myths often speak of combat, of arrows unleashed, of chaotic struggle. But the older rites, the rituals performed in the early days of Delphi, describe something more solemn. They speak of a confrontation that resembled a ceremony, a ritual of transition, an unspoken exchange between eras. Python's breath filled the space, thick with the scent of dreamlike vapors. Visions flickered in the air, indistinct shapes, whispers of futures unformed. This was the raw material of prophecy, before prophecy had discipline, the kind of foresight that overwhelms more than it guides. And Apollo understood. This place held knowledge, but it lacked direction. It was vision without measure, intuition without clarity. Light met shadow in silence. Apollo raised his bow not as an act of aggression, but as an act of definition. His arrow gleamed with the soft gold he carried within him, not blazing, not burning, but clean, precise. The cavern brightened by degrees, the way dawn slips quietly into a dream, not disrupting it, but transforming it. Python recoiled, not in terror, but in inevitability. When a creature born of unstructured breath meets structure, the meeting is not a battle, it is a resolution. Apollo released the arrow. There was no roar, no collapse of mountains, no spectacle of divine dominance. The arrow landed with the quiet certainty of truth finally spoken. Python exhaled one final breath, not a scream, but a long, mournful sigh, like the last whisper of an era consenting to end. The cavern grew still. The vapors settled. Where Python had lain, there remained warmth, memory, and a strange serenity, as though the creature had not been slain but transformed its chaotic breath, becoming the foundation for something more structured, more enduring. And Apollo, with the gentleness of someone closing a door, stepped deeper into the cavern. He walked slowly, his hand brushing the stone walls, absorbing the lingering residues of Python's presence, the ancient visions, the unrefined prophecies, the raw intuition that had once swirled untamed through the air. Apollo breathed in the last of it, letting the wisdom sift through him like smoke filtering into sunlight. And then, something extraordinary happened, not violent, not triumphant, but quietly transformative. The cavern brightened. The vapors no longer moved in wild spirals. They rose in thin, elegant streams. The air, once thick with murmurs, now held a single clear note, a resonance like a lyre string plucked in the heart of the earth. The unstructured visions that had once flooded the cavern began to settle into order, aligning themselves like constellations. Delphi was born. A place that had once been a cradle of primordial confusion became the center of clarity, foresight, and counsel. Under Apollo's presence, the chaotic breath that had once belonged to Python was refined into the prophetic voice that would shape centuries of Greek decision-making. The Pythia would sit here, inhaling the last remnants of the earth's ancient vapors, and speak not wild dreams, but structured prophecies, visions shaped by Apollo's light. It was through this transformation that Delphi became the navel of the world, the Omphalos, a place where humans came not for spectacle, but for guidance, for decisions, for the clarity that Apollo embodied. Kings sought direction, explorers sought orientation, cities sought legitimacy, all because one god transformed chaos into form. And this is where the cultural meaning of the myth becomes profound. The Greeks were not simply telling a story of a god killing a monster. They were articulating a shift in consciousness. Python represented an older religion, a chthonic, earthbound, pre-Olympian cult, centered on the raw, unfiltered forces of nature. Apollo, with his measured light, represented a new order, one that valued reason, proportion, and structured understanding. By having Apollo slay Python, the Greeks were not erasing the old, but integrating it. The chaos of Python became the foundation of Apollo's oracle. The old breath of the earth became the medium of structured prophecy. The ancient cave, once a womb of confusion, became the temple of clarity. It was not a replacement, it was a harmonization. This is the genius of Greek myth. To tell history through symbol, to express cultural evolution as a narrative of light meeting shadow. The slaying of Python was a ritual of continuity, the past giving way to the future without vanishing, the earth's old voice learning a new tongue. And so Apollo emerged from the cavern not as a conqueror but as a custodian. He did not claim Delphi as a trophy. He accepted it as a responsibility. He built no fortress there. Instead, he built a sanctuary, a place of listening, a place of clarity, a place where humans, lost in the fog of uncertainty, could find direction. As he stepped into the daylight, The mountains of Parnassus glowed with a quiet radiance. The wind carried a new kind of sound, not the drone of Python's ancient breath, but the soft hum of order settling into the world. And Apollo, with his bow slung gently over his shoulder, breathed deeply, knowing that something significant had shifted, not only in the land, not only in the myths, but in the consciousness of the people who would come after. He had not merely slain a creature, he had transformed an era. When Apollo stepped out from the cavern where Python had exhaled its final breath, the air of Parnassus began to change in ways too subtle for ordinary senses to register. The mountain breathed differently. The wind shifted its tone, drawing long, quiet lines across the slopes as though adjusting to a new geometry in the world. Even the stones beneath the young god's feet seemed to settle, becoming steadier, as if the earth itself had agreed to a new kind of order. In the hours following Python's transformation, the light changed first. It did not brighten violently or rush outward in triumph. Instead, a slow, whispering radiance began to gather around the mouth of the cavern, warm, faint, and unmistakably intentional. It was as though the world, now freed from the dense breath of primordial confusion, let the sunlight seep more deeply into its bones. The shadows lengthened but lost their threat. They became soft, contemplative, almost ceremonial, and within this shifting atmosphere, Delphi began to reform. Apollo did not walk away immediately. For a time he stood still, listening not to sound, but to meaning. The cavern behind him was no longer heavy with Python's chaotic presence. What remained was a deep, open stillness, a space where wisdom could move without being swallowed. The earth below hummed softly, not the ancient drone of disorder, but a calmer resonance, like the first tuning note before a piece of music begins. Apollo bowed his head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The transformation he had enacted was not a conquest, it was a transmutation. Where chaos had once curled in restless sleep, a new possibility had opened a possibility for structured insight, for guided vision, for prophecy that illuminated rather than overwhelmed. And so he left the cavern with steps as slow as prayer, descending the mountain through pathways where pine resin thickened the air, and the ground shone faintly beneath the last light of day. He knew he had not simply changed a place, he had changed a center, a point from which the world could be understood. As night approached, Delphi revealed a new character, shaped by the residue of Apollo's presence. The sky deepened to a blue-black velvet, pierced by early stars that shimmered with an unusual steadiness, as though they too were waiting for something. From distant villages and coastal roads, pilgrims began to move. At first, only a handful shepherds noticing a strange clarity in the air, travelers who felt pulled by an intuition they could not name, then more. Groups of wanderers, merchants, elders, young women carrying lamps lit from their home hearths, each flame trembling gently in the evening air. They ascended the mountain path slowly, the lantern lights forming a golden thread that wound upward like a moving constellation. The sound of their sandals on stone became a kind of rhythm, broken only by whispers, and the occasional soft clink of bronze offerings shifting in bags. To the pilgrims, the journey felt neither arduous nor light. It felt necessary, as though something ahead was breathing in rhythm with their own hearts, as though the mountain itself were calling them not loudly, not urgently, but with a calm inevitability. When they reached the plateau where Apollo had stood earlier, the air struck them first. It was warm despite the night, filled with a faint sweetness that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The scent of pine mixed with something deeper, a mineral freshness, ancient and clean, as if the world were exhaling clarity for the first time in ages. No structure yet existed there, no temple, no altar, no carved stone. But in the center of the plateau, A thin column of vapor rose from a crack in the rock, swirling upward into the night like breath escaping from the lungs of the world. The pilgrims gathered around it, instinctively forming a circle. Some knelt. Some stood with hands clasped. Some closed their eyes, letting the warm vapor wash over their faces. Each felt something shift within them, a feeling of being near an answer, even if the question was yet unknown. Then Apollo stepped forward. His radiance did not dominate the scene. It folded gently into it. A soft light flowed from him, illuminating the faces of those who had gathered, drawing no sharp lines, creating no harsh contrasts. Under that light, people did not feel judged, they felt seen. Apollo spoke no grand proclamation. He simply touched the stone near the rising vapor, and the ground hummed louder, as though welcoming his hand. He murmured a word ancient enough to feel like part of the mountain itself, and from that moment, the place awakened fully. The oracle of Delphi began. In time, structures rose around the sacred crack in the earth. An altar, a small chamber, a road lined with laurel and offerings from distant regions. Stone by stone, the sanctuary grew, but the heart of it remained the same, the vapors lifting from the earth's core, carrying with them hints of vision not fully formed, not dictatorial, but suggestive. Apollo's light refined those suggestions into prophecy. And at the center of those rituals sat the Pythia. She was not chosen for beauty or rank, she was chosen for resonance. Someone with a mind quiet enough to let meaning pass through without distorting it, and a heart steady enough to bear the weight of truth in its gentler forms. Before each ritual, the Pythia would walk to the Castalian spring, where cold water spilled from the rocks in streams that sparkled beneath moonlight. She would dip her hands into the current, letting the water slide over her skin. She would wash her face, breathing deeply, releasing every thought that clung too tightly to her. This cleansing was not meant to purify her body. It was meant to soften her presence, to make her permeable to the world. Afterward, she would walk barefoot to the temple, her steps slow, each one deliberate. Pilgrims stood aside as she passed, lowering their eyes in respect, as though witnessing something half divine. She carried no weapon, no symbol of power, only a small bundle of bay leaves, their fragrance sharp and clean in the night. Inside the sanctuary, she descended a narrow stairway into a chamber beneath the earth. The air grew warmer there, humid, fragrant with the vapors that had long risen from the crack in the rock. A tripod stood at the center, 3 slender legs supporting a simple bronze seat. Nothing about it was grand, it was humble, as though humility itself were the foundation of prophecy. The Pythia settled onto the tripod. She held the bay leaves in one hand. With the other, she steadied herself against the warm stone floor. As the vapors rose, she breathed slowly, deeply, her eyes half closed. Apollo's presence filled the chamber not visually, not as a blazing figure, but as a calming pressure in the air, a steady balancing of perception. The pilgrims waited above, candles trembling in their hands. Moments passed, minutes, then a voice rose. It was the Pythia's voice, yet not entirely hers, neither loud nor theatrical, soft, rhythmic, like a dream speaking itself aloud. Her words emerged in fragments that felt both close and distant. A season of question, a harvest of silver rains, a path that bends towards safety, but only if taken with humility. The pilgrim receiving the prophecy would kneel, absorbing the meaning slowly. He did not expect a command, he expected guidance. Apollo never told mortals exactly what to do. His words offered shapes, not blueprints, possibilities, not prescriptions. This was the nature of Apollo's prophecy. It is not because of lack of light, but because people can only take in the light they can bear. Indeed, too much clarity would undo them. To be shown the entire path of one's life would collapse the mystery that allows the soul to unfold itself. To know the future with certainty would strip meaning from choice. And so Apollos' words came wrapped in ambiguity, not to confuse, but to protect. The Greeks understood this intuitively. They knew that a prophecy too precise becomes a prison. A prophecy too bright blinds the one who receives it. Thus the oracles spoke in metaphor, in symbols, in phrases that required contemplation. The pilgrims would take the words home and live with them, letting the meanings settle gradually, much as the vapors had once settled into structured prophecy within the cavern. Stories of the oracles spread, carried by travelers across the Mediterranean. Some arrived asking about war, others about marriage, illness, or the founding of cities. The Pythia answered each with the same quiet clarity, her voice weaving possibilities rather than decrees. One man came asking when he should sail. She said, "When the gull circles thrice but does not call out." He waited weeks before noticing a gull move silently over the waves 3 times in a perfect loop. He set sail that evening and avoided a storm that destroyed dozens of ships the next morning. Another pilgrim asked whether he should plant olive groves on a rocky hillside. The Pythia whispered, "Sow where the stones are warmest after the light fades." He tested different slopes at dusk, touching stone after stone until he found a place that held the warmth long into night. His grove thrived. The oracle did not reveal dramatic visions of catastrophe or glory. She offered subtler truths woven with patience, presence, and observation. Apollos' light was not the light that blinds. It was the light that clarifies. As Delphi grew, so did its rituals. At night, processions of pilgrims winding up the mountain resembled rivers of fire, each lamp held carefully, each face painted with exhaustion and hope. They sang hymns as they walked, slow and melodic, their voices rising and falling with the contours of the land. The sanctuary glowed faintly as they approached, not from bright flames but from small votive offerings reflecting moonlight. Bronze tripods, carved wooden figurines, bowls of wine dark as the night sky, laurel wreaths prepared with meticulous care. Inside the temple, the air shimmered with a mixture of warmth and stillness. Priests tended the sacred flame, feeding it resin and thin shavings of cedar. The scent drifted into every corridor. Soft footsteps echoed in the stone halls, accompanied by whispers that never pierced the calm. And at the heart of it all, the Pythia, seated once more above the breath of the earth. When she spoke, pilgrims did not hear instructions. They heard themselves reflected in a deeper register. They heard the world speaking through Apollos' clarity. This is why Delphi became the center of Greek thought, not because it offered answers, but because it offered understanding. Kings sought counsel there, but so did shepherds. Philosophers meditated on its ambiguity, finding in the oracle a model for the nature of truth, multi-layered, symbol-rich, requiring humility to grasp. The Greeks believed that wisdom is not a thunderbolt, but a slow illumination, a light that grows gently, revealing contours first, then depth, then the connections between things. Apollos' prophecy embodied this philosophy. His oracle was not a spectacle, it was a rhythm, a breathing, a way of listening to the world. And in the quiet sanctum beneath Parnassus, where vapors curled upward like translucent threads, the Pythia continued to speak each word, a soft ripple in the wide, dark lake of human uncertainty. As centuries passed, Delphi became a tapestry of offerings and memories. Every stone, every stairway, every carved relief carried the imprint of questions asked and answers half given. Cities traced their founding myths back to its prophecies. Laws were shaped by its counsel. Wars were postponed or pursued based on its tempered visions. But despite its political importance, at its core, Delphi remained a sanctuary of subtlety. People did not come there for certainty. They came for orientation, for a lantern's glow on a fog-covered path, for a whisper that helped the heart lean toward truth. Apollo's gift was not the future, It was perception, and this understanding became woven into Greek identity. To seek the oracle was to acknowledge one's limitations, to bow before the vastness of unknowing without collapsing into fear. It was an act of humility, an acceptance that humans must walk the line between light and shadow, guided by clues rather than commands. In this way, the oracle mirrored life itself. We do not receive maps, we receive signs. We do not receive certainty, we receive clarity, small, steady, enough. Apollo's light is not a lighthouse, it is a lantern, and Delphi is where that lantern was kindled. By the end of each long night of prophecy, as the stars began to blur into the first blue shades of dawn, the Pythia would rise slowly from her seat. Her breathing softened, her posture shifted from ritual presence back into human form. The vapors thinned, the chamber cooled. She placed the bay leaves on the stone floor and whispered a final prayer, not for power, but for balance. Above her, the pilgrims dispersed quietly, each carrying home a piece of ambiguity wrapped in hope. They walked the descending mountain path with thoughtful faces, their lamps dimming as daylight seeped into the sky. And Apollo, the quiet custodian of this place, watched from the temple entrance. His light did not flare with victory or fatigue. It rested on him like a second skin, calm, contemplative, endlessly patient. He knew that what he had created at Delphi was not a monument but a method, not a show of divine strength but a way for humans to listen more deeply, a way to turn chaos into meaning without destroying the mystery that gives life depth. The Oracle of Delphi was born from the union of light and shadow, clarity and ambiguity, mortality and divinity. It stood as a reminder that truth does not come in complete brightness. It comes gently, in measured rays, revealing only as much as the human soul can absorb. And so Delphi remained for centuries the center of the world, a quiet flame, a breath of insight, a whisper rising through the earth, a place where Apollo spoke, not in thunder, but in light. When the long nights of prophecy faded, and the pilgrims descended the slopes of Parnassus carrying fragments of truth in their hearts, Apollo remained in the sanctuary with a stillness that felt almost medicinal. The quiet that followed each day of visions was not empty. It throbbed softly, like a pulse beneath the world. Delphi had become a place of clarity, but clarity alone is not enough to sustain a civilization. Understanding reveals the wound, but something else is required to mend it: healing. It was in this slow quiet after prophecy that Apollo's other nature began to glow more visibly. Those who lingered in Delphi noticed at first that his presence seemed to settle the mind, that the air around him grew warmer in a way that eased breath and softened tension. The pilgrims who arrived for guidance often found that they left with more than answers. They left with a sense of being put back into place, as though something in them had been retuned. Apollo was not merely a god of knowledge, he was a god of restoration. Yet, as with all light that heals, there was a paradox at its center. Apollo could cure, and Apollo could wound. To understand this dual force, we must walk gently into the nature of light itself. For nothing in the cosmos illuminates without also casting shadow, and nothing that burns with clarity does so without the possibility of scorch. The Greeks understood that healing is never a simple gesture. It requires knowledge, but knowledge can cut as much as it comforts. It requires light, but light, when too strong, becomes fire. And so Apollo's power contained both threads, woven together in a single golden strand: the ability to restore life and the ability to withdraw it. This duality did not trouble the ancients. It made sense to them. The sun warms the earth and raises the harvest. The same sun parches the soil and cracks the riverbeds. A physician's knife saves a man by opening the skin. A misplaced cut can end a life. Clarity can soothe the heart, but too much truth can undo it. Apollo embodied this delicate spectrum in its purest form. When he healed, it was with precision, the way a well-played note resolves a discord, or the way dawn settles into the bones after a sleepless night. His presence aligned things: breath, thought, pulse, intention. When he punished, it was with the same precision a sudden plague carried on golden arrows, striking not out of cruelty but out of exact retribution. He was measure, he was balance, he was the reminder that every remedy casts a shadow, and every shadow hides the memory of light. The clearest expression of Apollo's healing nature arose not from his own acts, but from the life of one he fathered, a child born from his love for Coronis, a mortal woman whose beauty shimmered like reflected sunlight on clear water. Coronis carried Apollo's child beneath her heart, and for a time the god watched over her with tender warmth. But human hearts are complex mosaics, always shifting, always trembling between choices. Coronis, fearing the weight of divine attention, turned her affection toward another man. A raven saw this and flew swiftly to Apollo, telling him of her betrayal. In that moment, Apollo's two natures collided sharply, the healer and the destroyer, the warm and the burning. His grief ignited into a flash of angry clarity. He sent Artemis, swift and precise, to loose her arrow. Coronis fell, yet as her body cooled, Apollo felt the regret deepen like a wound inside his chest. His anger dissolved, leaving behind only the harsh awareness of consequence. He knelt beside her and placed his hand upon her belly, feeling the faint stirring of the child who had done no wrong. In a gesture of grief mixed mercy, he drew the infant from her womb, not violently, but with the tenderness of someone lifting a small flame from ashes. This child, small and trembling, would become Asclepius, the greatest healer of ancient myth. Apollo carried the infant to Chiron, the wise centaur, and asked him to raise the child with care. Chiron understood what the boy represented: a paradox born from paradox, a healer born from death, a reminder that restoration often grows from ruin. Under Chiron's guidance, Asclepius learned the secrets of herbs, of roots, of the body's internal rhythms. He learned to listen to the faint music beneath skin, the pulse, the breath, the whispers of illness that most mortals never hear. But more than this, he inherited Apollo's sensitivity to light, not just visible light, but the metaphoric illumination that reveals where suffering hides. In Asclepius, Apollo's own healing essence became focused, sharpened, refined. And so, temples to Asclepius began to rise across Greece, each built in quiet places where the air felt soft and receptive, near springs, groves, or ridges where the horizon could be seen without obstruction. These were not hospitals in the modern sense. They were sanctuaries where body and spirit could rest in the cradle of ritual, and sleep, more than anything, became the doorway through which healing entered. Sleep was sacred to the Asclepian rites, not because sleep alone cured, but because sleep allowed the mind to surrender its defenses, to loosen the knots of daily noise, to open itself to insight and restoration. Patients who entered these temples did not come seeking medicines alone. They came seeking alignment. Before sleeping, they underwent gentle purification, a bath in cool water, a soft prayer whispered beneath the laurel trees, a quiet walk through the temple grounds where incense drifted through the air in spirals that seemed to dance like slow thoughts. When the time came, the afflicted would lie down upon woven mats in a darkened chamber known as the abaton, the place of the unseen. Torches burned low. The scent of burning herbs filled the room. A priest might sing a slow, low hymn, its melody simple and steady, like a heartbeat elongated into song. As they drifted towards sleep, patients entered a state the Greeks believed was uniquely receptive, a liminal zone where the soul could be reached more directly. And it was here, in the quiet between breath, that healing dreams arrived. Sometimes Asclepius appeared, touching a wound with his staff. Sometimes a serpent, his sacred symbol, curled itself at the sleeper's side. Other times, the dream revealed a simple image: a spring of water, a mountain path, a grove of olive trees where light fell clean and gold through the leaves. Upon waking, priests interpreted the dream's meaning, prescribing herbs, diet, ritual, or gentle exercises that matched the vision. To the ancients, this process was not mystical fantasy. It was a language. Dreams spoke in metaphor because the soul itself speaks in metaphor. Through dreams, Apollo's lineage of healing flowed into the world, not as sudden miracles, but as guidance, as recalibration, as gentle realignment. And always, beneath these rituals, was the echo of Apollo's own presence. For Asclepius was his child, and the temples that housed healing dreams glowed with the same warm light that once rose from Delphi's sacred crack. Healing, then, was simply another form of prophecy. A prophecy spoken not with words but through restored breath, steadied heartbeat, realigned thought. The dual nature of Apollo, healer and harmer, remained present in subtle ways even in the Asclepian temples. Priests understood that illness was often a form of imbalance, a misalignment between body and soul or between past and present. To heal this misalignment required clarity, the same clarity that could hurt if met without preparation. Thus, in many cases, the healing dream would show something uncomfortable: a forgotten sorrow, an old wound, a memory that had hardened into a knot. The dream did not expose these things to punish. It exposed them because bringing shadow into light is the first gesture of cure. This was the essence of Apollo's paradox: what heals may hurt, what restores may reveal, what purifies may burn. And yet, the burn is gentle when approached with reverence. The priests knew this. They guided patients through the difficult dreams, reminding them that Apollo's light never aims to scorch, only to clarify, to dissolve what is tangled, to warm what has gone cold. To the Greeks, healing was an art of harmonizing opposites. Too much softness leads to decay. Too much hardness leads to fracture. Apollo stood between these poles, holding fire in one hand and water in the other, blending them into the warm radiance of measured light. In time, people began to notice that not all healing happened inside the Asclepian sanctuaries. Some healing happened simply by listening to hymns sung at dusk, to the rise and fall of a flute played at a ritual, to stories told by wandering priests of Apollo. The Greeks had a word for this: aumensis, the healing that comes through sound, through the slow massage of the inner ear by tone and rhythm. It was believed that Apollo's lyre could mend the soul by tuning it. Just as a musician adjusts strings to perfect harmony, Apollo's music adjusted the unseen strings inside a person: the breath, the heartbeat, the mind's scattered fragments. A song could ease grief. A rhythm could soothe fear. A melody could draw someone back from despair. Listening, then, became a practice of healing, one that required no temple, no priest, no ritual. To hear a story of Apollo's early deeds, to listen to the quiet narrative of his light passing through forests or touching the caverns of Delphi, was to be bathed in a kind of inner warmth. The ancients said that Apollo healed through narrative as much as through medicine. A story clarified, a story organized, a story brought scattered thoughts into arrangement, the very essence of health. And here, across centuries, across languages, across distances, that truth still holds. Listening to Apollo's story gently told, slowly unfolding, wrapped in the soft cadence of myth, becomes its own form of healing. The breath slows, the mind settles, the heart softens. A quiet clarity seeps inward, the same clarity that once rose from the sacred crack in Delphi. Sound, story, and stillness. These were Apollos' remedies as surely as herbs or dreams. Asclepius himself would grow to surpass even his father in understanding the body's wounds. He learned how to close gashes, how to soothe fevers, how to relieve the aching lungs of laborers, how to cool the foreheads of children struck by illness. He learned when to use heat and when to use cold, when to apply pressure and when to loosen it, when to let the patient rest and when to rouse them gently. But his greatest gift, the gift that troubled even the other gods, was the ability to bring the dead back to life. It was said that he could summon breath back into still lungs, call warmth back into cold limbs, coax the soul to return from the threshold with whispers of comfort. Some gods marveled, some gods trembled, for if death loses its certainty, the universe begins to fray. Zeus, guardian of cosmic order, felt that fraying begin. He struck Asclepius with lightning, not out of hatred, but out of necessity, the same necessity that once guided Apollo's own dual nature. And Apollo, in his grief, struck down the Cyclopes who had forged the lightning bolt. For punishment, he was sent to serve a mortal king for a year, a gesture meant to teach him humility, though Apollo accepted it with quiet pride. Such is the nature of divine healing. It touches boundaries humans rarely see. It tests the balance between what can be restored and what must remain inviolate. Even after Asclepius was placed among the stars, healing sanctuaries continued to thrive. Temple floors echoed with soft footsteps, with whispered prayers, with the rhythmic murmur of dreamers sleeping in the abaton. Laurel leaves rustled gently in courtyards, where priests prepared the day's rituals. Young apprentices learned to grind herbs with pestles, mixing remedies by moonlight. And always, Apollo's warm, measured light hovered over these places, the light that reveals without blinding, that warms without burning, that guides without forcing. This was the true essence of his healing gift. A light that teaches the body and soul how to reorganize themselves, how to remember their own harmony, how to return to equilibrium. A light that sometimes hurts, sometimes consoles, but always brings one closer to truth. In this way, Apollo's healing was inseparable from his music, his prophecy, his reason. Each was a different form of the same principle: alignment. The alignment of mind with world, the alignment of pulse with breath, the alignment of present self with future possibility. Healing was not about eliminating pain, but about restoring coherence, tuning the scattered notes of a person back into a chord. And as you listen to his story now, the rhythm of it begins to work the same way. Slow, steady, warm, a narrative that drifts into the mind like a calming current, a cadence that loosens the tightness of modern hours, a quiet voice like the distant pluck of Apollo's lyre, weaving light into thought. Because healing even now is often just this: listening, resting, allowing clarity to come gently into the cracks, letting breath soften into the body, letting story gather the scattered parts of the self. This, too, is Apollo's gift. And though centuries have passed since pilgrims walked the slopes of Delphi with lamps flickering in the wind, the essence of his healing remains in sound, in silence, in story, in the soft glow that spreads inside the chest when truth is spoken gently. Apollo's light has always been more than a vision. It has always been a medicine, a warm, precise, golden medicine that touches the soul with both fire and balm. After the last whisper of healing faded from the chambers of Asclepius, and the night around Delphi settled again into its calm rhythm, Apollo remained for a long while in the sanctuary, surrounded by the gentle breaths of those who slept seeking renewal. His light, normally steady and warm, flickered subtly, not from weakness, but from an unspoken ache that lived quietly beneath his radiance. For all his knowledge, for all his measured beauty, for all the songs that soothed the heart and all the healings that set the world back into harmony. Apollo carried within him a loneliness that could not be mended by prophecy or music. It was not the loneliness of abandonment or rejection. It was a loneliness woven into the nature of light itself. Light touches everything, but nothing touches it back. The Greeks understood this deeply, that the purer the light, the fewer places it can rest without overwhelming or transforming them. Apollo's affections, when they bloomed, were always sincere, yet they were loves that could not stay. Loves that dissolved under the weight of his brightness. Loves that withered under the pressure of visibility. Loves that fled or broke, or were broken by the very precision of his nature. His love stories were not tragedies in the violent sense. They were soft tragedies, the kind that unfold in the quiet space between longing and recognition. They were stories of things that almost happened, stories of closeness that slipped through his fingers like the last warmth of a sunset. 3 such stories echo most clearly through the centuries: Daphne, Hyacinthus, and Cassandra, and each reveals a facet of Apollo's loneliness that even gods cannot escape. Daphne, the love that ran it, begins with Daphne, the nymph whose spirit was as wild as untouched forest, whose heart pulsed in the rhythm of flowing springs. Apollo loved her not for her beauty, though she was beautiful, but for her independence, the way she moved through the world without hesitation, without worry, without needing anyone to define her. She was like moonlit water, clear, free, forever slipping through grasping hands. Apollo's admiration grew slowly, then suddenly, like light streaming through the trees at dawn. It was a warm affection, sincere and respectful. Though his presence, his brightness overwhelmed her, for Daphne did not wish to be caught in anyone's gaze, let alone the gaze of a god whose vision penetrated every shadow. When Apollo approached, he did not shout, did not command. He walked softly, he spoke gently, yet even softness can feel like pressure when one's heart is built for solitude. Daphne ran, not out of cruelty, but out of fear of losing herself. The forest embraced her flight, branches parting, streams clearing her path, wind lifting her hair like ribbons of dark water. Apollo followed, not with predatory hunger, but with the desperation of someone trying to explain a feeling too vast to speak. He meant no harm, he wanted only closeness. But closeness, when offered by a god of radiant clarity, can feel like being seen too deeply. As Daphne reached the edge of a clearing, breath sharp, heart trembling, she realized she could not outrun him. So she prayed not for rescue, but for transformation. Let me be free in another form. Let me escape the fate of being held. Let me remain myself. Her prayer was heard. Her body softened. Her limbs rooted. Her breath became wind, stirring through leaves. Daphne became a laurel tree, tall, silent, ungraspable, eternally herself. And Apollo, arriving moments later, placed his hand upon her bark without anger, without protest. His grief did not flare. It sank. He whispered to her, "If you cannot be mine, you will be honored." He crowned himself with laurel. He crowned poets and victors with laurel. And from that day, laurel became the emblem of all who seek clarity, crowned not by conquest, but by transformation. Yet beneath that symbolism lay a quiet truth. Apollo loved, and she ran, and the only way to keep her was to let her go. Hyacinthus, the love that stayed too close. If Daphne was the love that fled, Hyacinthus was the love that remained and was lost for it. Hyacinthus was a youth of Sparta, radiant in the way spring sunlight is radiant. Fresh, impossible to resist, filled with a kind of gentle courage that drew the admiration of gods and mortals alike. Apollo loved him with tenderness, with companionship, with the joy of equal company, a rare comfort for a god whose brilliance often placed him apart. The two spent long days together, wandering fields, practicing the throwing of discs, singing under cypress trees. There was no fear in Hyacinthus, no impulse to flee like Daphne, no shrinking from Apollos' intensity. He met the god's light with his own warmth, unafraid of being seen. And Apollo, for one of the very few times in eternity, felt not solitary but understood. Yet brightness attracts more than admiration. It attracts rivalry. The wind god Zephyrus, jealous of Hyacinthus' affection for Apollo, followed them with a quiet bitterness that grew sharper as their bond deepened. One afternoon, as Apollo cast a discus high into the air, Zephyrus twisted the wind. The disc veered. Hyacinthus turned toward it with trusting eyes, eager to catch what Apollo had thrown. The impact was swift and silent. A brush of force, a collapse, a youth falling softly into the god's arms, breath slipping away like a whispered apology. Apollo held him, shaking, radiant with grief that flickered into fire, then dimmed into unbearable tenderness. He tried to heal him. He tried to reverse what had happened, but even a healer cannot always pull life back once it chooses to leave. Apollo's tears fell onto the ground where Hyacinthus lay, and where those tears touched the soil, flowers began to bloom, delicate petals shaped like folded wings, marked with lines resembling the Greek cry of mourning, Ai. The hyacinth was born not as a monument to tragedy, but as a reminder that love, even when lost, leaves beauty behind. Apollo tended the field of these flowers for many days, long after Hyacinthus' spirit had moved on. He did not rage. He did not blame. He simply kept vigil, letting his grief soften into devotion. For Apollo, love had turned to flower, and a flower, though fragile, endures in its own way. Cassandra, the love that spoke truth. Cassandra's story is softer still, though it hides a sharp sorrow. She was the daughter of Priam, gifted with a mind that shimmered like distant fire, insightful, curious, unwilling to settle for half-meaning. Apollo admired her not for appearance or grace, but for her intellect. She had a hunger for truth that mirrored his own, and he offered her a gift, the gift of prophecy. In exchange, he asked for her love. She accepted the prophecy. She did not accept him. It was not cruelty. Cassandra saw the god clearly, his brilliance, his dignity, his loneliness, and she respected him too much to pretend at a feeling she could not authentically give. But divine gifts, once bestowed, cannot be withdrawn. Apollo could not take back the sight he had given her. He could only reshape its consequence. And so he altered one thread of her fate. She would speak true visions, but no one would believe her. This was not a punishment of rage. It was a sorrowing correction, an adjustment of balance. A gift too great, refused too directly, needed a different form. Cassandra saw the future with painful accuracy. The fall of Troy, the deaths of heroes, the suffering that would follow. But her people laughed, dismissed her, called her mad. Apollo never mocked her. He never gloated. He watched her quietly from afar, his expression unreadable, his light dimmer around the edges. For he had given her clarity, the thing he treasured most, and it had become a burden she could not put down. Here lies the tragedy of Cassandra. She carried Apollo's vision, but she bore it alone. And Apollo, though divine, felt that loneliness as though it were his own reflection. The lone lioness of light. In Daphne, Apollo reached out and could not hold. In Hyacinthus, he held and could not keep. In Cassandra, he offered truth and could not share its weight. Three loves, three echoes of a single reality. An sang kang thun hiet, kang ko cham vow, kang sang, kang kodok. Apollos' loneliness was not the loneliness of abandonment. It was the loneliness of clarity, of seeing too far, feeling too precisely, shining too brightly for ordinary closeness. Light reveals, But what reveals must often stand apart. And so Apollo walked through the world with a quiet ache woven into his radiance. He healed others, but love rarely healed him. He guided kings, but rarely found someone who could guide him. He illuminated the hearts of mortals, but struggled to find a heart that could hold the weight of his illumination without trembling. In every myth, in every hymn, in every whispered story about him, this truth lingers beneath the surface like the shadow cast by his own brilliance. Light longs to be embraced, but only shadows can embrace it fully, and shadows vanish when light approaches too closely. This is the tragedy not of punishment, but of nature. Apollo was clarity, he was proportion, he was the song that reveals the pattern in the soul, and for that very reason, he was destined to love in fragments brief, beautiful, incomplete. A quiet conclusion. When the night settles on Delphi and the last pilgrim descends the path, Apollo sometimes remains alone among the pillars, listening to the soft wind moving between them. It is said that he thinks then of Daphnis' leaves trembling in distant forests, of hyacinths blooming in spring fields, of Cassandra's lonely voice echoing in the halls of Troy. He does not grieve loudly. He does not lament. He simply remembers with a tenderness that has no anger left in it. Love, for him, is a kind of music, short, haunting, resolving before the listener is ready. And yet, in that incompleteness, there is a strange beauty, a reminder that not all stories are meant to be whole. Some are meant to echo. Some are meant to flicker like light through leaves. Some are meant to bloom briefly and leave a fragrance behind. Apollo's loves were never failures. They were illuminations. Each revealed something true, not only about the ones he cared for, but about the nature of the god himself. And as long as his light exists, warm, measured, tender, lonely, these stories will remain as soft shadows trailing behind him. For in the end, his loves teach us a single, quiet truth. Light that heals the world is often the light that cannot heal itself. After the soft ache of Apollo's unfulfilled loves fades into the night, the world around him quiets in a different way. Not with sorrow, but with clarity, the kind of clarity that emerges after emotion has washed through and left the mind clean again. It is in this softened state that we can begin to see Apollo not only as a figure of myth, but as an idea, a shape carved into the culture of ancient Greece, not through force, but through the gentle, persistent presence of light. For Apollo's influence extended far beyond prophecy, healing, or love. It reached into the very essence of Greek identity, into their art, their poetry, their sculpture, their architecture, their philosophy. It shaped their imagination, their ideals, their sense of beauty and order. Apollo did not merely live in Greek myth. He lived in the Greek mind. His light became a language, a style, a way of being. And that style, calm, measured, harmonious, would echo across centuries, long after temples had fallen and the winds around Delphi had scattered their stones. The Apollonian aesthetic Greek art is often spoken of with reverence, its marble sculptures admired for their proportion, their balance, their serenity. The faces of gods carved from white stone hold expressions that never drift into excess. The bodies are idealized not through exaggeration but through refinement. This is Apollo's influence. The Greeks created thousands of sculptures, yet many of them share the same internal grammar, a quiet confidence, a measured posture, a beauty that rests not on ornament, but on form. They did not sculpt emotion, they sculpted essence. Consider the Kuroi young male statues carved in strong, geometric lines. Their gaze is forward, steady, controlled. Their posture neither tense nor relaxed, but balanced. A harmony of limbs, an equilibrium of stance. This is Apollonian clarity. Or consider the temples built in his honor. The columns arranged with mathematical precision. the proportions crafted to please the eye not through extravagance but through exactness. Even their imperfections were intentional slight curves, subtle thickness variations, all ensuring that light met stone in the most harmonious way possible. Apollo taught the Greeks that beauty was not noise, beauty was order. Beauty was the meeting point between form and meaning. He did not instruct them directly. He inspired them the way morning light inspires a painter by clarifying the shapes of trees, or the way a soft chord inspires a poet to choose the right word. For the Greeks, Apollo became the guardian of aesthetic balance. Through him they learned to value proportion over spectacle, symmetry over chaos, thought over impulse. His presence shaped their sculptures, their hymns, their tragedies, even their mathematics. Apollo was not just a god, he was a template. The lyre as a symbol of structure, Apollo's lyre, was more than an instrument. It was the purest expression of Apollonian logic. A lyre produces sound not by force, but by balance, the tension of strings carefully tuned, each vibrating at a specific length and frequency. Too loose, and the sound collapses. Too tight, and the sound snaps. Harmony is precision, and so the lyre became a symbol of measured existence, a reminder that beauty emerges not from unbounded feeling, but from feeling shaped, disciplined, guided. When Apollo played, he was not merely performing, he was teaching. He was shaping the emotional grammar of a civilization. Even today, when we think of classical harmony, or proportion, or order, we are unknowingly echoing Apollo's lyre, a subtle lineage of light passing through millennia. Apollo and the poetic mind. Poetry for the Greeks was a sacred act, a translation of the invisible into language. Poets did not write casually. They wrote as though listening to something beyond themselves, and the presence they listened for was often Apollo. Homer's invocations begin with a call to the muses, but behind the muses stands Apollo, the invisible structure guiding the rhythm, the flow, the clarity of the verse. Apollo governed not the emotion of poetry, but the form of it. He was the guardian of meter, the father of lyric, the architect of proportion in spoken art. And here we understand something essential. Apollo was not the god of inspiration that overwhelms. That role belonged to others, especially Dionysus. Apollo was the god of refinement, the second breath that makes the first understandable. If Dionysus represented the chaotic impulse that bursts forth from the heart, Apollo represented the craft that shapes that impulse into something communicable. The Greeks believed you needed both. But without Apollo, poetry would dissolve into unformed feeling. Without Dionysus, poetry would become sterile, hollow, lifeless. This duality, this necessary tension, defined Greek creativity. Dionysus and Apollo, chaos and order. To truly understand Apollo's role in culture, we must step into the ancient contrast that shaped Greek philosophy. The opposition between Apollo and Dionysus. They are not enemies. They are complements, twin poles around which the Greek imagination revolved. Apollo was clarity, harmony, geometry, reason, sunlight, composure. Dionysus was ecstasy, emotion, instinct, wildness, night disorder. Abandon. Apollo's worshippers came in quiet processions, their steps measured, their hymns soft. Dionysus' followers danced in ecstatic circles, their movements erratic, their voices wild with intoxicated joy. Where Apollo sought to reveal the world, Dionysus sought to dissolve it. Where Apollo brought the mind into focus, Dionysus freed it from boundaries. One carved shape, the other blurred it, and between them, Greek culture found balance. Their tension defined not only religion but art, politics, personal ethics. Every Greek citizen, whether consciously or not, lived somewhere between these two poles, between the desire for order and the longing for release. In sculpture, this balance created works both structured and alive. In poetry, It created verses both disciplined and moving. In philosophy, it shaped dialogues about reason and feeling, law and passion, form and freedom. Apollo gave direction. Dionysus gave fire. Without Apollo, the Greeks believed civilization would crumble into frenzy. Without Dionysus, it would calcify into rigidity. The dance between the two shaped the Greek soul. The stillness that reveals pattern Apollo's influence on Greek thought did not end with art. It extended into their concept of self. To the Greeks, Apollo represented the stillness inside the mind, the quiet center from which understanding emerges. Not the absence of thought, but the arrangement of it. When one sits at Delphi, listening for the oracle, the experience is not dramatic, it is meditative. The vapors rise softly. The priestess speaks slowly. Her words float through the air like drifting leaves. And in that quiet space, something aligns inside the listener, an internal geometry forming where chaos once lived. This was Apollo's gift. Not clarity forced upon the mind, but clarity arising gently within it. Greek thinkers adopted this quality. Philosophy became a practice of soft illumination, observing the world, questioning assumptions, letting understanding grow not from force but from patient contemplation. Apollo was the light that reveals structure, not through glare, but through gentleness. His light did not blind, it shaped. Apollo and the human ideal. In Greek culture, the ideal man, the kalos kagathos, was not defined by power or wealth, but by proportion. Body, mind, emotion, reason, all in balance. This ideal was Apollonian. A man too cold, too controlled was incomplete. A man too passionate, too unrestrained, was equally lacking. Only through harmony could one approach excellence. That concept seeped into Greek athletics. Measured training, disciplined practice, balance between strength and grace. It shaped Greek politics, deliberation over impulse, argument over violence. It shaped Greek education, poetry, mathematics, music, all converging toward balance. Apollo's light became the blueprint for a civilization seeking equilibrium, the legacy of Apollo's light. Even after Greece fell under Roman rule, Apollo's influence remained. Roman poets invoked him. Roman sculptors copied Greek Apollonian statues, chasing the same serene balance. Roman philosophers debated Apollonian reason versus Dionysian feeling, using different names but the same eternal duality. And long after the temples of Delphi crumbled into stone, the idea remained in Europe's mind. During the Renaissance, artists revived the Apollonian ideal: symmetry, proportion, clarity. During the Enlightenment, philosophers invoked Apollo without naming him. Rationality became the new sunlight. Even now, when we speak of balance, harmony, clarity, composure, we speak the language of Apollo. His light is not gone, it is woven into the world, into the symmetry of buildings, into the cadence of poetry, into the calm of reason, into the soft structure that appears when the heart and mind finally align. Apollo is no longer just a god. He is an archetype, a cultural heartbeat, a reminder that light is not merely what lets us see, it is what lets us understand. A quiet ending. As we drift from this chapter, imagine Apollo standing among the columns of Delphi at dusk. The light around him is clean, measured, golden, not bright enough to blind, not dim enough to vanish, just enough to reveal the shape of things. He listens to the wind moving through the laurel leaves, leaves that once were Daphne, now trembling softly in the quiet. He looks toward the fields where hyacinths bloom each spring, reminders of a love that turned to beauty. He hears echoes of Cassandra's voice, true, clear, and unheard by those who feared too much clarity. And through all of this, Apollo's light remains steady, not loud, not overwhelming, just calm, just clear, just present, the light of culture, the light of understanding, the light that shapes the human world while asking nothing in return. That is Apollo's legacy, not in miracles, not in battles, but in every place where order meets beauty, where thought meets feeling, where form meets meaning, in every moment where light quiets the mind instead of dazzling it, in every place where clarity becomes grace. When the influence of Apollo began to settle into the foundations of Greek thought, into their art, their literature, their idea of balance, no one could have guessed how far his light would eventually travel. Gods rise and fade in the rhythm of human civilizations, yet some presences linger long after temples collapse. Apollo was one of them. His light, so soft and measured, did not vanish with the fall of Delphi or the quieting of Greek city-states. Instead, it drifted gently and steadily into the imaginations of new empires, new artists, new philosophies. The next great civilization to feel the warmth of Apollo's presence was Rome. Apollo in Rome, the favored god of Augustus Romans, absorbed Greek myths with a mixture of admiration and ambition. They loved the order, the beauty, the calm precision of Apollo. More importantly, they saw in him a symbolic power that matched their political aspirations. The man who embraced Apollo most fiercely was Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Augustus admired Apollo not only as a god of light, but as a god of order. For a ruler who sought to transform a fractured republic into a stable empire, Apollo was the perfect divine partner. Augustus built temples in his honor. He placed Apollo's image on coins. He aligned his political reforms with Apollonian ideals: clarity, discipline, moral renewal. He positioned himself as a kind of earthly extension of Apollo's light, guiding Rome not with brute force, but with a vision of stability. In this era, Apollo's identity shifted slightly. He became a guardian of empire, of law, of civilization itself. The Romans linked his name with health, with poetry, with prophecy, but also with Roman order, a unifying brightness meant to anchor a diverse world. Under Augustus, the arts flourished. Poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid wove Apollo's calm guidance into their lines. Painters began depicting Apollo not as a remote Greek god, but as a symbol of Roman dignity. Even as Rome expanded across continents, Apollo remained a quiet compass at its cultural center. And through Rome's influence, the idea of Apollo traveled further than Greece alone ever could have carried it. The long silence after empire's fall. When Rome eventually dimmed slowly, painfully, Apollo did not vanish, but he did fall quiet. The rise of Christianity reshaped the religious landscape of Europe. Temples closed. Statues lost their worshippers. The oracles grew silent. And yet, Apollo's image survived, not as a god to be prayed to, but as a symbol that refused to fade from the artistic memory of Europe. Monks copying ancient texts preserved stories of Apollo's music, his prophecies, his healing, his clarity. Scholars of the early Middle Ages studied Greek philosophy, and through philosophy, they met Apollo again not as deity, but as idea. In this pause, Apollo's light did not disappear. It simply waited like a candle protected by cupped hands in a long night. He would rise again when Europe was ready for him. The Renaissance. Apollo's return in the Age of Light. Then came the Renaissance, a world waking from centuries of dimness. Artists searching for proportion, scientists searching for truth, poets searching for the lost language of beauty. It was during this rebirth that Apollo stepped forward again, quiet but unmistakable. Renaissance thinkers revered the ancient world, and in the process, they rediscovered Apollo as more than myth. He became the patron of clarity, symmetry, human reason, the light that fuels inquiry rather than superstition. Painters like Raphael, Botticelli, and Leonardo depicted him with serene faces, perfect posture, radiance that seemed almost intellectual rather than divine. Sculptors revived the classical ideal of the Apollonian body, poised, balanced, harmonious. In literature, poets invoked him as the muse of rational thought. Scholars contemplated the Apollonian as a guiding spirit of the New Age, the age when Europe turned toward mathematics, astronomy, anatomy, music theory, and architectural geometry. Apollo's light became the metaphor of the Enlightenment before the Enlightenment existed. He represented a world governed not by fear, but by understanding, not by chaos, but by order, not by divine command, but by the human capacity to shape truth from observation. For the Renaissance mind, Apollo was the ideal human, made divine clarity in artistic form, balance in philosophical thought, harmony in the creative spirit. His light no longer shone only on temples, it shone on academies, studios, observatories, libraries. Apollo had become a symbol of knowledge itself, Apollo and the rise of scientific light. As Europe stepped further into the age of reason, Apollo's presence shifted again, this time from art and poetry into science. Astronomers studying the motions of stars used Apollonian language, clarity, illumination, insight. They spoke of light as understanding, echoing Apollo's ancient role in revealing truth through radiance. Physicians, inspired by ideas of balance and proportion, aligned their work with Apollonian ideals. The caduceus and the rod of Asclepius, Apollo's son, became universal symbols of healing. Hospitals adopted his imagery, seeing in Apollo not mythology, but lineage, the origin of scientific medicine, the metaphor of restored health. Philosophers like Kant, later Nietzsche, wrestled with the Apollonian and Dionysian dichotomy, the tension between reason and passion, structure and chaos. Nietzsche, especially, gave the terms Apollonian and Dionysian a permanent place in Western thought. For him, Apollo represented the dream of form, logic, and discipline, the light that gives shape to human experience. In this way, Apollo's influence grew beyond Greece, beyond Rome, beyond Renaissance art, into the intellectual bloodstream of the modern world. Apollo became a mentor of thinkers who never spoke his name. Apollo in modern arts, music, film, literature. Even now, Apollo's figure echoes quietly in the landscape of culture. In classical music, composers often invoke Apollonian ideals, balanced phrasing, symmetrical structure, a search for clarity within emotion. Beethoven's sonatas, Bach's mathematical precision, the serene architecture of Mozart's melodies all carry traces of Apollo's calm order. In literature, the Apollonian character appears again and again, the thinker, the healer, the rational dreamer, the figure who stands in light not because he seeks it, but because he is it. Writers weave him into metaphors when describing beauty, reason, or the ache of perfection. Even in modern films and popular media, Apollo persists sometimes as the archetype of the gifted healer, sometimes as the radiant hero, sometimes as the calm strategist whose mind shines clearer than the world around him. His name is invoked in space missions, NASA's Apollo program, tying the ancient symbol of light to humanity's leap toward the stars. We reached the moon under Apollo's banner, as though acknowledging that the same light which once illuminated Delphi now guides the horizon of exploration. His figure appears in medicine, in philosophy, in artistic theory, even in branding and technological symbolism. Whenever there is a desire to evoke clarity, elegance, rationality, or healing, Apollo's shadow, gentle, golden, stands nearby. He is not worshipped, he is referenced, he is remembered, he is repurposed for new meanings. Apollo has become a cultural resonance rather than a deity, a silent symbol woven into the architecture of our modern imagination. Apollo. In the present moment, the now, today, when a person speaks of being in the light, when a scientist celebrates discovery, when a musician tunes their work toward balance, when a physician restores health through careful understanding, they are participating unknowingly in Apollo's long legacy. Even in the quiet act of listening to a story, letting its rhythm settle the breath, letting its clarity guide the mind toward rest, this too is Apollonian. For Apollo's presence is not thunderous, it is quiet, it is contemplative, it is the soft glow of knowledge settling into the corners of thought. He lives wherever there is art that seeks harmony, science that seeks truth, medicine that seeks restoration, music that seeks order, philosophy that seeks clarity. In this way, Apollo is still alive not as a divine being but as a pattern of human aspiration, a dream of balance, a yearning for light, a belief that understanding can bring peace. His temples may be ruins now, his statues chipped, his hymns forgotten, but his light, the light of reason, healing, and measured beauty continues to glow across the world. From Greek marble to Roman law, from Renaissance art to scientific discovery, from poetry to the quiet moments before sleep, when clarity begins to bloom gently inside the mind, Apollo remains. A lantern in the long hallway of human history. A reminder that light, at its best, does not dazzle, it guides. The night around Delphi settles into its deepest quiet. The last traces of sunset have long dissolved into the mountains, leaving only a soft, velvety darkness that seems to breathe with the earth. The air cools gently. The pines hush their whispering, and in the sanctuary, where centuries of prayers still linger like faint echoes, Apollo stands alone for a final moment. He carries no bow now, no laurel crown, no mantle of radiance. Only his lyre, the instrument that has shaped worlds, soothed griefs, healed restless hearts. He looks at it with a tenderness that feels almost human. And then, with a motion as soft as a sigh, he sets it down. The strings release one last trembling note, a thin ribbon of gold sliding through the darkness. It hangs in the air for a moment, then fades, like breath against cool night sky. Apollo's light follows the note, not a blaze, not a flare, nothing grand or celestial, just a quiet dimming, a gentle tapering of warmth, as though the god of light is remembering how to rest. And as that warm glow softens, the night becomes a cradle. If you're listening now, let yourself sink a little deeper into wherever you are resting. Feel the support beneath you. Feel the weight leaving your shoulders, slowly, steadily, like sand slipping through fingers. Take a slow breath in and a softer breath out. Again, slowly in and gently out. The world outside can wait. Every worry, every unfinished thought, every sound that brushes the edge of your awareness, let them drift away, the way Apollo's final golden note drifted into the night. This is your quiet now, your soft light moment. Apollo steps back from the lyre, and the glow around him melts into the darkness, not disappearing, but blending like warm honey stirring into cool water, leaving only a faint halo that pulses as softly as a resting heartbeat. In this dim light, his presence no longer dazzles, it comforts. It spills gently across the stone floor, across the columns, across the sleeping laurel leaves outside, as though offering the world one last, small blessing before withdrawing into silence. That same light reaches you too, not directly, but through the story we've walked together through the forests of Delos, through the vapors of Delphi, through the healing chambers and tragic loves, through millennia of art, music, philosophy, memory. All of that warmth has been gathering quietly around you, wrapping itself along the edges of your breath. You can rest in it now. You can let it carry you. Apollo closes his eyes. It is a strange image, a god lowering his radiance, folding himself into stillness, trusting the night to hold him. But even light must rest, even clarity must soften. Even gods must be cradled by the same darkness that cradles all living things. He inhales once, long and slow, as though drawing the entire world into his chest, and exhales a warm, dissolving sigh that seems to smooth the night itself. The sanctuary darkens, but nothing feels lost. Only quiet, only peace. As you lie there, listening, let Apollos' rest become your own. Let your breath fall into rhythm, slow, steady, like footsteps across smooth marble. If thoughts come, let them drift in and drift back out, like stars sliding behind soft clouds. If emotions rise, let them warm you for a moment, then melt like the last glow on Apollos' fingertips. Nothing is asked of you now. Nothing is required. This is the chapter without effort, the moment without direction, the space where all you have to do is be. Outside the temple, a faint wind stirs. It passes through the laurel tree's leaves that once were Daphne, still trembling with quiet life. The branches rustle softly, not in sorrow, but in a lullaby. Hyacinths bow their heads in the night air, petals glowing faintly, as though holding a memory of Apollos' early grief and early love. And far away, in the echoes of Troy, Cassandra's voice fades into silence, not unheard this time, but resting. All the stories, all the journeys, all the centuries of Apollos' light take a final breath together and settle. You may feel yourself drifting now, your thoughts loosening, your chest softening, your body becoming pleasantly heavy, as though sinking into the gentlest sea. Let that happen. Let it pull you inward. You are safe. You are warm. You are held. The world is dimming around you the same way Apollos' light dimmed. Slowly, beautifully, without fear. Let the darkness come. Not the harsh kind, but the kind that feels like a warm blanket, the kind that closes the eyes tenderly, the kind that invites dreams like soft feathers brushing your mind. And before the final quiet arrives, Apollo offers one more whisper, a blessing not spoken aloud, but felt. Rest in the soft light. You have traveled far. You have listened deeply. Now sleep gently, so breathe and drift, and let the night draw near. No more story now, no more path to follow. Only peace, only warmth, only the slow folding of thought into the safe cradle of sleep. Good night, dear traveler. May Apollo's soft light guide you into the quietest dreams.